What happens when you stop caring about what people think? And how does that relate to how you love yourself? What will people think? This is a question that we all can relate to. So let's get really self honest and delve into this episode because it's going to reveal some pretty profound things. Some people think that looking in the mirror and smiling at yourself helps you find self love. And you know what? I don't think that's a bad idea. Self affirmations and all that good stuff can definitely help. But I think truly loving yourself happens somewhere much deeper. It begins when you stop allowing other people's opinions to determine how you see yourself. I want you to really think about that for a minute. When you stop allowing other people's opinions to determine how you see yourself, that's where self-love begins. We give people so much power over our lives. Sometimes when you really think about it, it's kind of insane. We say things or don't say things based on what we fear another person's reaction might be. And the truth is, we don't really know what they're thinking. And here's where self-love comes into this. If your mind is constantly occupied with what everybody else thinks about you, there's not much room left to figure out what you think about you. What do you want? What do you think? How do you feel? Who are you when you're not trying to anticipate someone else's reaction and have that distraction? That's the connection. The less time I spend monitoring myself through everybody else's eyes, the more room I have to actually get to know myself. And that's where this story really begins. Friends, families, coworkers, acquaintances, even people on the street. Here's something that should actually make you feel better. They probably aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. So you can relax and let your guard down. People are primarily concerned with themselves. So think about it. How many things have you talked yourself out of before anybody else even had the chance? How many opportunities have you not taken because you're worried about what someone else might think? And who suffers over the idea you never pursued, the idea that probably they didn't even know you had? The answer is nobody. No one. Except you. You suffer. I did this for years, especially when it came to my career. For much of my life, friends and family thought a steady 9 to 5 with a guaranteed paycheck made a lot more sense for me than all of these entrepreneurial and creative aspirations I had. And listen, I understood their point. A guaranteed paycheck is a nice thing. But I never felt completely settled in any 9 to 5er. There was always something else pulling me, music, an idea, something creative, something I wanted to build. Years ago, I worked at City Search in New York City. When I started, there were about 10 of us. By the time I resigned years later, I think there were close to 200 plus employees. The company went public while we all worked there. It was a major, major opportunity. I could work hard, come up with all kinds of ideas, and potentially make a ton of money. But instead, 5 o'clock came, and I was pretty much out the door. I was playing gigs, singing national anthems, recording. Had I completely applied myself to City Search, maybe I would have accumulated enough equity to live very comfortably for a long time. Maybe I could have even been rich. In my 20s, who knows? But music kept interfering. And you know what made the conflict even harder? I thought I had to explain that to everybody, friends, family, whoever. And here's something I've learned since then. You can explain yourself 10 different ways. And a lot of people are still going to walk away with the same opinion they had before you started talking. It's kind of like the book Blink. Have you ever read it? The point is, why are we exhausting ourselves? Looking back, the truth is simple. I didn't owe everybody an explanation. And no, I never became hugely famous, if you will. But during that time, I sang at Madison Square Garden several times. I sang at Shea Stadium for the New York Mets. I became a winning contestant at Harlem's toughest room, the Apollo Theater. So I certainly got somewhere. Then something changed. Fast forward to today. I've had some major successes, but they didn't necessarily come through a 9 to 5er. A lot of them came from ideas that I actually implemented. So what's changed? Me. First, I noticed that I didn't have the, need to over-explain myself. Then I noticed something even bigger. I wasn't explaining myself much at all anymore. I wasn't consciously trying to stop. I don't have that kind of skill. It just started happening. I knew why I was doing what I was doing, and suddenly that was enough. Instead of filling my mind with, how am I going to explain this? I started filling it with what I want to do next. That's a completely different way to live that I'm explaining here, a completely different mindset. And I wasn't willing to risk losing my best life because somebody else might not understand it. I became more comfortable in my own skin. I smiled more genuinely. I refocused my energy on myself. And strangely enough, I started attracting more and more people into my life, not fewer. Maybe because I was finally becoming comfortable being me. And here's a part I didn't understand at first. When I stopped spending so much time thinking about what everybody else thought about me, I suddenly had a lot more room in my own head for myself. Think about it. How much mental energy we use monitoring ourselves. Should I say this? Should I say that? Should I do that or this? How am I going to explain this? What are they going to think? I was doing that constantly, monitoring what I did, what I wanted to say, what I wanted to try, and how somebody else might react to it. And when I stopped doing that so much, there was almost like this empty space left behind, but it wasn't empty for long. Because instead of filling that space with everybody else's opinions, I started filling it with my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own ideas, and my own goals. And that's when I started getting to know myself better. I could actually hear myself again. What do I think? What do I want? How do I feel about this or that? What matters to me? That's the connection. And I think that's where self-love really begins. Not by deciding one morning that you're fabulous, but by finally giving yourself enough room to figure out who you are. But once you start hearing your own voice more clearly, there's another question. Are you actually going to listen to it? Because knowing what you want is one thing. Doing something about it is completely another. And that's where action comes into this. Dreaming is great. I personally love dreaming. But eventually, you've got to take the shot. Take the chance. Love that person. Reach for the goal. Do it, whatever it is. Try the thing that even you sometimes think is completely out of reach. You lose 100% of the chances you never take. 100%. So instead of asking, what are they going to think of me if I try? Ask instead, what am I going to think of myself if I never do? If I never do. Somebody else's opinion should not get veto power over your life. And once I started understanding what I was actually capable of, something happened. I started trusting myself. And taking those chances did something else for me. I started trusting myself more. But then I ran into a deeper question. If I'm finally listening to myself, do I actually understand what I'm hearing? Because you can't really love somebody you don't know. And believe me, there was a time when I didn't know myself very well at all. And this is where things got very interesting for me. Because once I finally had more room to hear myself, I discovered something. Hearing yourself and understanding yourself are not the same thing. I remember sitting in therapy years ago, and my therapist would ask me, "How did that incident make you feel, Andrea?" And I would literally say, "I have no idea." Sometimes I'd even say, "I feel dead." I could not describe what I was feeling. You couldn't pay me enough to describe what I was feeling. Sometimes I didn't even know anything about what I was feeling. And my therapist taught me something that sounded strange at first. If you can't name the emotion, try to describe it. Give it a color. Give it a texture. Maybe I feel blue today, or I feel black and blue. Maybe the feeling is cold, raw, it's rough, smooth, whatever it is. Attach something tangible to this thing happening inside of you. And slowly something started clicking. Oh, I feel sad. Or, oh God, I'm really angry. Or this is lonely. I'm lonely. I was learning my own emotional language, and that matters. Because how can you really know yourself if you don't know what you're feeling? Back then, I was so lost with this. So if you're listening and thinking, I don't even know what I'm feeling half the time, I understand. Start somewhere, a color, a texture, a sensation. And when I feel bad now, I don't always try to immediately make the feeling disappear either. Sometimes I let it soak in. Joy feels different when you've known sadness. Connection feels much different when you've known loneliness. Sometimes I'll listen to music. Sometimes I'll talk to somebody. Sometimes I'll talk to God. But first, I accept the feeling. This is sadness. I'm going to let it soak in. Once you allow yourself to actually experience it, it usually becomes a lot less scary. You feel it slowly, one feeling at a time, whatever it is. And then you find your way back. Learning to recognize my feelings helped me understand the person I was in the present. And then I started wondering, how did I become this person in the first place? And for that, I had to go all the way back to the beginning. So where do you even start to get to know yourself? For me, one of the most powerful places to look was also the most obvious. Who was I before life got so complicated? If you don't know where to start with loving yourself, try thinking of yourself as a child, just yourself. And as a child, 3 years old, 10, 12, whatever age works for you. Go back to that innocence and offer that child the same care you'd offer any child you loved. For me, it's about forgiving that little girl for all of the things she hadn't learned yet. Because how could she have possibly known? And actually, how can I possibly know everything now? I can't. I'm still learning. I'm still evolving. I do not have this down to a science. You can't punish yourself for lessons you haven't even learned yet. I was also a pretty anxious kid. So if I could sit beside that little girl today, one of the first things I'd probably tell her is, don't worry so much. And interestingly enough, that's something I still have to remind myself of today. Once you picture that younger version of yourself, something becomes very hard to ignore. How are you talking to that child now? Because a lot of the things we casually say to ourselves are things we'd never dream of saying to a child we love. How do you talk to yourself? Once you see the younger version of yourself, clearly try this. Listen to the way you talk to her, him, her. Because some of us would never speak to another person the way we casually speak to ourselves. Some of us. Here's something else I've learned to do. Catch the negative thoughts as they're coming in. Oh, that's stupid. I can't believe I fucking did that. I look awful. And then stop yourself. Would you talk to that little kid that way? Hopefully not. So change the language. That wasn't stupid. Maybe that was actually a pretty good idea. or I look beautiful today. Whether you completely believe those things right now or not is not the most important part. Say them anyway. Because when you start changing the way you speak to yourself, something happens. You develop empathy for yourself. I'm much more gentle with myself now, with my words and my thoughts, and strangely enough, more gentle with other people too. That happens naturally. Learning to become gentler with myself helped me enormously. But I also realized I wasn't doing all of this by myself. There's another part of my life that affects how I see myself, how I handle pain, and even how I experience being alone. Now, there's one piece of this I can't leave out, because for me, it's changed everything. And for me, that's God. God. My faith isn't separate from the way I've learned to love myself. It's woven right through it. There's another enormous part of this for me, my faith. I rely on God. Sometimes I pray, dear God, please lift any negative images I have of myself. And I give some of that weight to Him. My faith is also a huge part of why I don't feel alone nearly as often as I once did, and why sometimes I actually choose to be alone. I talk to God, and apparently I entertain myself pretty well too. I write, I research things, I'll watch a dramatic movie. I spend time by myself. But I've also learned to spend more time in the present moment. Not yesterday, not 3 weeks from now, right here. Because so much anxiety lives in something that already happened or something we're afraid might happen. And that changed the meaning of being alone for me. Because here's the strange thing about loneliness. Sometimes it has almost nothing to do with whether anybody is physically beside you. You can be lonely in a crowded room. You can have plans, you can have friends. You can walk into a room packed with people and still feel completely alone. Loneliness isn't necessarily about being physically alone. I felt lonely in rooms filled with people when I didn't feel good about myself. I could be surrounded by people and still feel like an outcast. Do I belong here? What do they think of me? Do they like me? I'm in a room filled with people and I'm barely experiencing any of them. Once I began feeling better about myself, though, something changed. I wasn't monitoring myself all the time anymore. I wasn't constantly thinking about what I did, what I was about to do, what I wanted to say, or how somebody might react. There was more freedom in my own head. And when all that noise started getting quieter, I suddenly had a lot more room to notice everybody else. I became much more interested in the people around me. With all of that outside of my head, and taking a genuine interest in somebody else can completely shred my feelings of loneliness. Because now I'm curious. Who are you? What's your story? What makes you laugh? And suddenly I'm connected. Once I wasn't relying on a room full of people to make me feel connected, another part of my relationship started changing too. I began looking at the difference between wanting people in my life and needing them to make me feel whole. Wanting people, not needing them. So if being surrounded by people doesn't automatically cure loneliness, what are we actually asking other people to do for us? That's a question I started looking at very differently. Someone asked me recently whether loving myself means that I need people less or whether I love them more freely. I try not to think of people as a need. I just don't. People come, they go, relationships change, and sometimes people close to us even die, which is heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching, but something has loosened. My grip. I want people rather than needing them to complete something inside of me. If it's Saturday night and I don't have plans and everybody else seems to be somewhere, okay. I might write, watch a movie, make a call, but I don't feel like I have to call somebody. If I call you, it's because I want to, not because I need you to rescue me from Saturday night. There's a huge difference. And if you stop asking another person to complete you, a pretty big question follows. What happens when that person leaves anyway? Hmm. Where do you go when somebody rejects you, disappoints you, or simply isn't there anymore? For me, the answer became something I think of as the home within me. The home within me. But here's the real test. It's one thing to feel whole when everybody you love is right where you want them. I'm asking you what happens when someone leaves. When someone leaves, rejects you, disappoints you, doesn't give you the answer you hope for. I still feel those things, believe me. Self-love does not give you a shield of armor. I still feel things too deeply sometimes. I'm still working on finding that balance. But I don't disappear into somebody else's rejection the way I might have once. I pray. I remember myself. I remember my own heart. And I remind myself that wherever I go, whoever I'm with, the home within me still exists. And what's inside that home? Love. I know that sounds corny, but it works. No matter where I am in the world, I'm home. For me, God fills that home too. People can add enormous love, joy, companionship, and friendship to your life. They can break your heart too. But they cannot be your entire home. And that doesn't mean losing someone won't hurt. It means you don't have to lose yourself if you lose that person. Now, I can almost hear all the objection to this. Doesn't focusing this, too much become selfish? Where's the line between self-love and ego? I think there's a huge difference. And no, this isn't ego at all. Now, before anybody else thinks I've turned this into me, aren't I fabulous? No, that's not what I'm talking about at all. Loving yourself isn't conceit. It's not. Look at me. I'm fantastic. I'm better than everybody else. Actually, I think the greater the ego sometimes, the emptier that place inside can be that I call home. Conceit can be a shield. To me, loving yourself means really knowing yourself. And that means knowing the parts you like and the parts you genuinely don't like. Because I've got those too, believe me. When I recognize something in myself I don't particularly like, I remind myself, I'm human. I go back to God. I go back to that inner child. But I don't pretend the flaw isn't there. Because sometimes loving yourself means looking straight at yourself and saying, yeah, that one was on me. And knowing yourself means you eventually meet the parts of yourself you don't particularly love. So what do you do then? Pretend they're not there? Beat yourself up? Or can you love yourself enough to say, yeah, I need to work on that? Because that's where accountability comes in. Accountability gets easier. Actually, here's one of the weirdest things I've discovered about self-love. It became easier to admit when I was wrong. You'd think loving yourself would make you more defensive. For me, it did the opposite. It's much easier for me to admit when something is my fault these days. Because when you begin to know yourself, you want to be your best self. Nobody wakes up in the morning saying, I want to be as bad as I can possibly be today. Not somebody who's self-aware anyway. And I think loving yourself actually makes accountability easier. Saying I'm sorry, I was wrong, I could have done better, doesn't feel like the same threat to who you are. Being wrong about something doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Now, do I always handle everything beautifully? No, of course not. I still lose my temper. I still make choices I wish I'd handled differently. Suppose somebody aggravates me, and instead of walking away, I engage. I argue. I almost never feel good afterwards. So if I want to consistently respect myself, I have to pay attention to my own behavior. Not just everyone else's, mine. Remember objectivity from episode 1? Here it is again. What happened? What triggered me? Was I overwhelmed, or did I simply make a bad choice? Self-love doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook. It means being able to look honestly at what you did without destroying yourself over it. But accountability creates another challenge. Once you admitted you were wrong, how do you keep that from turning into beating yourself up? This is where I've learned to give myself another chance. Okay, but then what? You admitted you blew it, great. Are you going to punish yourself for the next 3 days, the next week? I don't think the answer is there either. I start again, sometimes the very next day, sometimes within an hour. Sometimes just remembering that I have the power to change helps me to turn things around almost immediately. I'll get out of the house, I'll take a walk, maybe I'll do something nice for a stranger or help an elderly person. Years ago, a wise older man said something to me that really stuck. If you want self esteem, do esteemable things. I love that because self esteem isn't only something you think yourself into, sometimes you behave yourself into it. Help somebody, smile at a stranger, do something kind when nobody's watching. Because here's the way I look at it: if I lose a few points, I could always add them back. And as I get better at respecting my own behavior, I start paying closer attention to something else. What behavior I was willing to accept from other people. Because self-respect doesn't only change how you treat yourself, it changes what you allow around you. And once you start treating yourself with more respect, something else gets very noticeable. The people who don't respect you, or they're not showing respect, that's where boundaries started changing for me. Loving myself has also changed what I allow into my life. I'm more careful about the who and the what I give my energy to. I've learned to say, no, I'm sorry, but I can't do that for you today. Not everybody respects my time as much as I do. That doesn't necessarily mean they're intentionally taking advantage of me. It means I have to decide what I'm available for. I've also become more sensitive to patterns of disrespect. If I care deeply about somebody, I'll address it. If I don't, sometimes I simply just make better choices and move on. I've wanted, not needed, but I've wanted some important new people in my life, and I've let some other people go. Sometimes the relationships around us have to evolve with us. But boundaries don't always mean walking away. Sometimes the person matters deeply to you, and you have to decide what matters more, winning the argument or protecting the relationship. I had one of those moments recently. Sometimes love means ending the argument. But boundaries aren't always about saying no or walking away. They're not. Sometimes self-love gives you enough room to ask, do I really need to win this? I'll give you an example. I had a disagreement with my mom recently. What we were arguing about isn't important. Could have stayed in argument mode. Believe me, I'm perfectly capable of it. Something else happened that day. She defended me in a situation. And when I was leaving, she said, I'll miss you. That meant the world to me. Now, it's not that she doesn't say it all the time, but I heard it. You know what I mean? So instead of focusing on everything that had gone wrong, I sent her a brief email just telling her specifically what she had done that day that made me feel good. I told her how valuable she is to me. And that felt better. We still disagreed. I didn't have to pretend we didn't. But the disagreement didn't have to become the entire story. Of course, choosing the better response once doesn't mean you're suddenly going to get it right every time. So what happens when you don't? What happens when you really fall flat on your face? Of course, none of this means I suddenly became some perfectly evolved human being. Please, that's ridiculous. I still fall flat on my face. And what happens when I really screw up? When I fall flat on my face, I think about why it happened. But not forever, because love brings resilience. I've failed plenty of times. Plenty of things have not gone my way. And eventually you begin to trust that failure isn't a final verdict on who you are. Sometimes the road you choose wasn't the right road, but maybe there was still something on it you needed to learn. And failure serves another very important purpose. It keeps me humble. I've changed around success too. I'm better at actually enjoying it now, feeling proud, including people in it. It's not just about me or all about them. Instead of worrying about what everybody thinks, I can actually celebrate it with them. And after enough of those failures, recoveries, better choices, and lessons, something else begins changing. the way I saw myself. Not just emotionally, even literally. The person looking back at me in the mirror. And yes, I like the person in the mirror. And after all this talk about what's happening on the inside, okay, let's talk about the mirror. Because something changed there too. I like my personality. I'm more easygoing. I'm more comfortable in my own skin. I'm less uptight. And mostly, I like how I look. It's that I don't spend time worrying about it. If I'm going out with friends, family, whomever on a date, I'm not obsessing how am I going to look. I'm okay with myself. And that's pretty cool. Now, if you look in the mirror and don't like what you see, try another angle. I'm kidding. Seriously, though, I think it's an inside job. Integrity, kindness, how you treat people, how you treat yourself. And for me, a healthy faith in God. Because when you begin liking who you are, you become a whole lot kinder to the person looking back at you. But liking yourself doesn't mean you've graduated from difficult feelings or life. And there's one feeling I especially don't want to make sound like we've somehow conquered: loneliness. Because self-love doesn't make you immune to it. And sometimes you're still going to feel lonely. Now, here's the part I don't want to sugarcoat. You can love yourself. You can have faith. You can know exactly who you are and still have a lonely Saturday night. There's nothing wrong with feeling lonely. I still feel it sometimes. I think we understand certain feelings partly because we've experienced their opposites. Can we completely understand joy without knowing sadness? Connection without ever feeling alone? Maybe loneliness has a texture too, raw, cold, attached to a memory, whatever it is. There's nothing wrong with feeling it. The difference for me now is that I don't allow myself to drown in it. I accept it, I feel it, and eventually it moves. It moves. Self-love doesn't mean you're happy every second. It doesn't mean you never feel rejected, insecure, angry, hurt, or lonely. It doesn't give you armor. I'm still working on this too. I still feel life and feel people very deeply, but now I trust myself more. And for me, I trust God. So when something hurts, I know I can feel it without allowing it to define me. And that brings me all the way back to where we started. If self-love doesn't mean never hurting, never failing, never feeling lonely, and never needing anybody, then what does happen when you stop caring so much about what people think? What actually happens when you stop caring so much about what everybody thinks? Maybe the answer isn't that you stop caring. Maybe you finally start caring about the right things. So maybe the title of this episode is a little misleading because I'm not suggesting that you stop caring about people. Quite the opposite. I'm suggesting that maybe you stop giving everybody else's opinion so much authority over you. You become more comfortable saying, I was wrong. I'm sorry. No, I can't do that today. This is what I want. This is who I am. And life starts becoming easier to live, I assure you. Not because life becomes easy. I'll never promise you that. Because you're no longer fighting yourself while trying to live it. And maybe that's one of the greatest gifts of self-love. Because if you learn to truly love yourself, I think you become better at loving everybody else too. Your kids, your partner, your own family, your closest friends. Not because you need them, because you want them. So maybe self-love isn't about staring into a mirror every morning and convincing yourself that you're fabulous. Maybe it's about knowing the person who's looking back at you, knowing what she's been through, knowing where she screwed up, knowing what she survived, knowing what she still hasn't figured out, and loving her anyway. Because wherever you go, whoever stays, whoever leads, whatever succeeds and whatever fails, the home within you, it still exists. And if you fill that home with love, you're never really starting from empty. This is Andrea LoCascio, and thank you so much for listening to the Social Maggot Podcast.